So what are you going to do when you're in class? You're going to go on social media, play video games, maybe space out? Or are you going to be focused, engaged, and taking notes? We hope you're going to be taking notes. But how are you going to take notes? You can take them handwritten or you can take them digitally. How are you going to store them? How are you going to use them? A lot of questions about notes. There isn't one answer, and so we're going to go over your options. Benefits of taking notes: helps you stay focused and engaged in class because you're doing something productive versus doing something not productive. It gives you study material to review later. If you take notes in class, you can use that to when you're making your study materials or when you're reviewing what happened in lecture. Especially important if the teacher gives a lot of information that's not on the PowerPoints. Taking notes can help with retention in itself. Just by taking the notes, it can help you learn. And you can also keep track of questions you have in class because there could be a lot of things that come up in class that may be confusing. And not everyone, some people have no problem asking questions during class, but some people don't want to ask questions during class to distract the flow of class. Or sometimes some people have a lot of questions. Writing those questions down as you get them to ensure you don't forget them. That way you can ask your teacher in between lecture hours or at the end of the lecture. If you don't want to ask it in class, which the teachers allow questions, so don't feel like you can't ask questions. So what are we going to cover? We're going to cover the pros and cons of handwritten versus typed notes, programs and apps that can help you take notes, and effective note-taking strategies regardless of what program or whether you write or type your notes. Handwritten versus typed notes. Which is better? Well, there was a time where there was only one option. People didn't have laptops, so you just wrote your notes. But now it looks more like the picture on the right, where it's actually rare to see someone without a laptop in class. Even in my day, over a decade ago, I was one of maybe two people that didn't have a laptop for the first few months. Now it's definitely the norm. Now, but is it good? Is it good to be able to type your notes? I think some people would think, well, yeah, I get to type more. I can type everything out. I can type faster than I can write, and so that way I can take more notes, and then I have more to study, so I shouldn't be missing out on the details. I should do better. But this actually isn't what the science says. So this is from the Association for Psychological Science. I'm going to read the abstract here. Taking notes on laptops rather than in longhand is increasingly common. Many researchers have suggested that laptop note-taking is less effective than longhand note-taking for learning. Prior studies have primarily focused on students' capacity for multitasking and distraction when using laptops. The present research suggests that even when laptops are used solely to take notes, they may still be impairing learning because their use results in shallower processing. In 3 studies, we found that students who took notes on laptops performed worse on conceptual questions than students who took notes longhand. We show that whereas taking more notes can be beneficial, laptop note takers' tendency to transcribe lectures verbatim rather than processing information, reframing it in their own words, is detrimental to learning. So what's that saying? That's saying that with the laptop, you can take more notes, and that is a good thing. However, if you're taking notes without thinking, if you're mindlessly typing and you're not processing it in your brain, you're actually worse off than if you had less notes, but you were processing the notes as you were writing them down. And the reason why people who take notes longhand process the notes more is because you have to. You can only write so quickly. You can only write so much per minute. So you have to condense things. You have to take words out. You have to simplify words. You have to take a sentence the teacher says and reduce it to just a couple words or maybe symbols. I drew a lot of arrows. This leads to this, so I just put a word, arrow to the other thing. And so there's a lot going on where you're thinking about the material. That's where the benefit is. When you're taking notes, you really want to think. And this, the term for this is called generative notes versus non-generative notes. Generative notes include summarizing what's said, paraphrasing it, concept mapping, taking the concepts and relating them together, essentially thinking. Non-generative is verbatim copying. That's just mindlessly typing the words that you hear. It may seem like you're capturing all of it, but really it's not even being processed by the brain, and so you're not going to learn it as well, especially for those conceptual questions where you have to understand things. What does this mean? That's very important in the field that you're getting into. It's really important to understand things. So regardless of whether you are taking notes handwritten or laptop, be sure you're taking generative notes. Don't type out everything just because you can. You still want to simplify it. You still want to make connections. You still want to paraphrase things and put it into your own words. You want it to your brain to filter it before it gets onto your notes. So some things you can do, writing down connections. I would just connect things. If a teacher says, well, when you do this, then that happens and that happens and that happens, well, I would write each of those things down and just put an arrow and simplify it, because that chain of events is important. So I would write that just with arrows. Simplify and paraphrase. Write down what your teacher emphasizes. So you don't have to write everything. Don't write down everything your teacher says, but write down the things that they emphasize. If they talk about something for 3.5 seconds, then you probably aren't going to need to know that. But if they talk about it for 10 minutes, you're probably going to get at least one question about it. And so write what your teacher emphasizes, what they talk about, what they spend a lot of time on. Make sure to take those notes, but don't get caught up taking notes about the things that they just breeze through. I also recommend not writing down what you already know. Save time, save space, and don't overload your brain with a lot of stuff that it knows already. And lastly, you can do a mind map. You can do a mind map or concept map where you're not just writing things down, but you're connecting them. Okay, what are some handwritten and digital options? Again, whether you write your notes or you type your notes, you can still take generative notes. So don't feel like you have to write them, and also don't feel like you have to type your notes. You can do whatever you want. And I'm going to go over a lot of options for note taking, but I will tell you now, I was a terrible note taker in the sense of I took notes in class, and I think they were generative notes because I wrote my notes. I didn't really type a lot, and so I write shorthand. I wouldn't study them. That's why I said I was a bad note taker, in the sense that I wouldn't study them after. But by writing them out, it did help me learn the information. But you don't have to have a complex, high-tech note-taking strategy to graduate or to learn the material. These are cool options that sometimes I wish I had done, but don't feel pressured to. Okay, so one way to take handwritten notes is called the Cornell method. Cornell notes. So if you had a full piece of paper, this obviously is more like an index card. On the left margin, you'll write keywords or questions. In the bottom, you'll write a summary, and then everything else, you'll take your notes. And there was one student who he used to do this, where he would come up to me after class, and I'd see him go down the right side of his notes. He hand wrote his notes. Maybe the only person in class that did it. But you go right down that margin and ask each question one at a time. There are a lot of digital note-taking software options. The first three, Evernote, MS OneNote, and DevonThink, these are all cloud-based storage options. So you can access your notes anywhere. There was a student that a few years ago that unfortunately she was studying with her friend, and her friend spilled some coffee. The coffee got on her computer, ruined the computer, and she lost everything from her first year. So she started using I think she used, it was either Evernote or OneNote. Started using it afterwards because she wasn't going to lose her notes again. So having something that's stored in the cloud that you can access on different devices or even on a computer that's not yours can be really beneficial. Now, for each of these, they all have their pros and cons. I'm not going to go in too much detail because it's really an individual thing. I personally use Evernote. I think it's very similar to OneNote, in that it's cloud based. You can search for things. You can embed different types of files into it. So, but I use Evernote because I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not on Microsoft everything. So Evernote for me is pretty good. I also like that Evernote you can take pictures of people's business cards and then I'll send them a LinkedIn request if you have the paid version, and it does really good searching where if you upload handwritten notes into Evernote, you can take a picture with your phone if you have the app and it scans it in really good quality. Actually, it doesn't look like a picture, it looks like a scan. And then depending on how your handwriting is, it can actually search your handwriting. So when you're searching for something and you're looking for, you had to remember something about chromium, what the dosage is, so you can type in chromium. If you have handwritten notes with chromium on it, if it's legible, then the Evernote will return those notes for you because it has the word chromium on it. So it can do typed, obviously it can search whatever you type, but also what you write. And you can also upload PDFs of things and it'll search those too. So it's really cool. I'm a huge fan of Evernote. I have the paid version. I've had it for a while, worth every penny in my opinion. MS OneNote is also a really good option. A lot of students use it. One of its benefits it has over Evernote is that you can embed the PowerPoint easier into OneNote since they are both Microsoft products. They integrate really well, and so you can essentially save the PowerPoint on this OneNote sheet. It's just like one long piece of paper. As you scroll down, you see all the slides, and then you can type or even write next to the slides to take your notes. So a lot of students will do that, where that they have the slides from the teacher, and then they have their notes next to it or even on it. It can be typed. You can draw on it. And so there's a way, so it's a way to take notes on the notes without having to print them out first. Devin thinks another option, not as popular. This is much more robust in its search function. It uses Boolean searches, so you can see I want to look for chromium near diabetes because I don't want to hear about all the things chromium does. I just want to know what chromium does for diabetes. So you can do more robust searches. It is not as, let's say, aesthetically pleasing. It's just like a database, but some people really love it, and especially if you have the mind for it. I don't know what that mind is necessarily, but maybe someone who doesn't care as much about aesthetics and wants just a really robust searchable database that's all power, no frills. Maybe consider DevonThink. Notability, this is another one. I think it's just on iOS, so for the iPad users. And while it doesn't have a good note storing capability like Evernote and OneNote, Evernote you can make notebooks, you can do the same in OneNote, and I think DevonThink you make folders. With Notability, you don't have the same ability to store large volumes of information, but what's cool about Notability is that you can it's easier to draw on the notes, and you can even record audio at the same time. One thing you can do with these different apps and programs is you don't have to just use one. You can use a few. So what if you use Notability to draw your notes out and then uploaded it, exported it to like a PDF, and then put it into your Evernote or OneNote or DevonThink? So that's a way to get the best of both worlds if Notability has something that you want that these other note-taking software programs don't have. Here are some things that students have done to take notes because there's a lot of things you can do. So let me give you some examples. Some students, they convert the PowerPoint to a Word doc, just just all the bullet points in like an outline form, and then they go to class with that outline ready to go, and they just type in the outline. So they're not worrying about all the slides, all the various slides. Just put it on one outline so that when they're done with it, they have a study guide. Another option is to import the slides into Microsoft OneNote, which I mentioned, and write and type the notes in there. You can, all right, I talked about this one too. Draw notes with Notability, save as a PDF, and store in Evernote. You can type your notes in the PDF, the PowerPoint document in the bottom notes section. And then when you're out of class, you can make a study guide or one sheet looking at not only the notes, the material from the PowerPoint, but also the notes you took from class, where you combine them together. That's kind of what I would do, or that I would take my handwritten notes, and while I wouldn't study those directly, I would take my handwritten notes and my class notes, the class material, and bring it together so that I can get rid of the PowerPoint and not look at that again. So my notes are pretty temporary in the sense that they were just getting me to that next stage. And so if you're typing notes in the PowerPoint, hopefully you're not reading all the notes in the from the PowerPoint each time. You should be taking that information and transferring it to something like a one sheet or mind map or a study guide, something that's going to be easier to learn. And you can handwrite your notes and scan them into Evernote. And Evernote, if your handwriting is not too bad, will be able to search your handwritten notes. Here are some tips for success, whether you're going to write or type your notes. Consider how you plan to use your notes in the future. Probably to study for boards, capstone, maybe to use in clinic when you're with patients. You want to know someone has diabetes. Okay, I got to think of all my herbal treatments for diabetes. Well, if that's the case, you may want to start tagging notes. Tagging is where you can it's almost like putting things in little folders in a sense. You can put them in multiple folders at once. And so if you tag notes, so at any time a teacher mentions diabetes, you can put diabetes as a tag. And so that way, when you search for the tag diabetes, those notes will come up and you have some information about it. Especially important if there are certain conditions that maybe people in your family have that you want to learn about, or that you feel is going to be your calling when you're a doctor. That stuff really good to make those tags so that it's easier to search. You can do the same thing with treatments. If something is TCM versus whether it's supplements or nutrition or homeopathy, you can tag those too to be able to search for modalities. But I'll tell you one thing, you're probably not going to search for your notes by quarter when you're a doctor. You're not going to be thinking, oh, what's that herb about diabetes that I learned in quarter 11? You're not going to remember these things the farther you get out. You're going to remember herbs, diabetes. And so even though it's smart to organize your notes by quarter, by class now, keep in mind that if you plan to use these notes in the future, you want to also be able to have them organized and searchable the way that you're going to search for them when you're a doctor. That being said, don't feel like you need to have notes that are going to be forever usable. I use notes mainly as a means to an end. I use a lot of resources that textbooks and other sources that are reputable. I don't have to rely on my PowerPoints. Think as you type or write. Don't just do it mindlessly. Make sure you're thinking at the same time. That's going to help you learn. If you're typing without thinking, you are doing yourself a huge disservice. Maybe better off just not typing at all and just being present. Don't just write notes. Include questions, ideas, connections. Again, get that brain moving, get it thinking, get it working. Paraphrase your notes rather than typing everything verbatim. And get creative. You don't have to just type your notes or write your notes. You can make mind maps. There was one student who would go to, what's the name of it? I think it's it might have been Anki, but it was an online, no, Quizlet. It was Quizlet. So she would, in class, because she had a hard time staying focused, she would, as the teacher was talking, if she heard the teacher say something or ask a question or say this is important, she would be making questions in Quizlet. That's how she took notes, was by making questions as the class went on. And so by the time she was done, she had all these practice questions that she didn't have to read notes. She just answered the questions. So that was a really cool strategy. So get creative, think outside the box. But at the same time, don't overthink it, in the sense of don't get analysis paralysis where you're trying to get it perfect and it has to be this way, otherwise I can't move forward. Try things out. There are a lot of ways to take notes. There isn't even just one way, and there's no way you're going to know what works for you until you try something. And if you try it and it doesn't work, try something else. And if you need help, if you need guidance, ask someone. There's a lot of people that are going to help you here that have experience and can guide you in the right direction. So don't overthink things to start. Just give something a try. And if you don't like it, then try something else. Or if you just want to take handwritten notes, there's nothing wrong with that. You don't need to have these robust digital notes that will live longer than you. You can just take handwritten notes and then use that to make your one sheets or mind maps, and then throw out those notes afterward. That's what I did, and it works just fine. There's pros and cons to everything, but don't feel pressured to do what your neighbor's doing. So in conclusion, don't stress about note taking. Take notes, but don't worry about how you're doing it necessarily, just as long as you're thinking. But it doesn't have to be, it has to be in this program or it has to be handwritten. Don't stress about it. Just think. Keep it simple if you like. If you just want to write pencil and paper and write questions in the margin, you can do that and be very successful. So don't feel like you have to use the technology. And as we saw earlier in this video, technology can actually get in the way. Try something and be flexible and open to change if it's not working. Don't dig your heels in and just think, this is it forever. You can change it up quarter 2, quarter 3, year 2. I didn't start using Evernote until after I graduated. So don't feel like it has to be perfect or try to force something that's not working. And lastly, I've said it a lot of times, but I'm going to say it again. Think while you take notes. Always good to use your brain. Your brain is going to be one of your greatest assets in medical school, so don't forget to turn it on and use it when you're in class. So with that, note taking, hope you're taking notes, but don't be like a courtroom stenographer. You don't need to capture everything. It's good to get a volume of notes, but not if you're taking them mindlessly. That's a waste of time. Take notes, but think about it so that your brain is engaged and you will get a lot more out of class.